The afternoon had already settled into a quiet rhythm, and everything felt as if it were held in a gentle embrace by time itself. The soft, golden sunlight poured through the curtains in lazy, almost reverent beams, filling the room with warmth that made everything seem to glow just a little brighter. Outside, the world was still, as if suspended in that delicate moment between the rush of the week and the promise of the coming night. It was the kind of day where the air held a hint of something tender, something nostalgic. And everything down to the rustle of the leaves in the distance seemed to speak in whispers. I had just finished watering the plants by the windowsill, those few stubborn greens that, despite my frequent neglect, had somehow endured. They had become companions of sorts, silent, steadfast, and reminding me of my own resilience. My house felt like a quiet retreat in the middle of the world's noise, the only sound being the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the old wooden floors beneath my bare feet, and the occasional whisper of the wind brushing against the windows. I sank into my favorite armchair, the one whose upholstery had worn thin with years of use, the arms soft and familiar. It cradled me like an old friend, just as it always had. The book I had been meaning to start lay forgotten beside me. As I reached for it, lost in the comfort of the moment, I heard a soft, hesitant knock at the door. It was a gentle sound, barely more than a whisper, almost as though the visitor were unsure whether they should be here at all. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was one of those afternoons where you think no one will disrupt your peace, where time is meant to flow like a river without interruption. I rose and moved to the door, my curiosity piqued. When I opened it, I was met with the familiar sight of Ethan, the son of my neighbor Daniel. He stood there, his hands nervously fidgeting with a worn notebook tucked under his arm, a slight awkwardness in his stance. His faded jacket and well-worn jeans seemed to mirror the quiet intensity he always carried with him. It had been a while since I'd seen him, not since he'd returned from his first year of college. Ethan had always been a quiet soul, polite, reserved, and deeply introspective. He wasn't the type to ask for help unless he truly needed it, and even then, it came with hesitation, as if the very act of reaching out made him vulnerable in a way he wasn't comfortable with. He was the kind of person who seemed to carry the weight of the world in the stillness of his gaze. "Hey, Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice soft but carrying an unexpected warmth. The formality of it made me smile, the sound of it familiar, yet strangely distant, as if I were hearing it from another lifetime. I chuckled, shaking my head gently. "Ethan, come on. You're 20 now. No need for the misses." He blushed, a shy smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was a smile that spoke volumes, timid, unsure, but also carrying a sense of relief, as though he had been given permission to shed some of the armor he had built around himself. "Right, Karen. Sorry to bother you." I could see that he was uncertain, his words stumbling over one another. But his presence here standing at my door, his expression caught between hesitation and determination made something in my heart stir. It had been so long since I had been needed, so long since I had felt that small but significant role in someone else's life. Something in me had longed for this sense of purpose again. Something as simple as being asked to help someone find their way. "No bother at all," I said, stepping aside and opening the door wider to let him in. The faint scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the lingering fragrance of lavender from the kitchen, and I couldn't help but smile at the comforting familiarity of it all. "What brings you here?" He hesitated, his eyes scanning the room as though he might find the words he needed written somewhere on the walls. "I didn't want to disturb my mom. She's busy with work and, well, I remembered you used to be a teacher. I'm struggling with this essay for my writing class, and I thought maybe you could help." His words hit me with a jolt of help with a writing assignment. Me, a retired teacher, long past my days in the classroom? The idea seemed almost absurd, and yet there was something in his tone, in the vulnerability that laced his voice, that made me feel like I was still capable of guiding him in some way. I wasn't sure how much advice I had left to offer, but I could see how much it mattered to him. The earnestness in his voice was all it took to push aside my self-doubt. He needed me, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. "Of course, Ethan. Come on in." You want something to drink?" He nodded slightly, his discomfort palpable but softened by my invitation. I led him to the kitchen, where I poured us both a glass of iced tea. The cold drink, a simple pleasure, seemed to help ease the tension between us, as if it were a quiet gesture of comfort. We sat at the old wooden table that had witnessed so many conversations over the years. Some casual, some deeply profound, and some, like this one, a little uncertain but full of potential. Ethan placed his notebook on the table, his fingers nervously tracing the edges. He seemed torn between the weight of the task in front of him and the fear of not being able to articulate whatever it was that was blocking him. He looked up at me, his eyes searching for something, perhaps guidance, perhaps permission to let go of the doubts that had been haunting him. "I have to write a personal essay for class," he said, his voice quieter now. "But I don't even know where to start. I keep writing and deleting everything. It's like nothing feels right." There it was, the frustration, the self-imposed pressure, the feeling of being lost in a sea of words that refused to cooperate. I could hear it in his voice, the same uncertainty I had heard from so many students in the past. And suddenly, still capable of helping someone find their way through the labyrinth of their own thoughts. I leaned forward slightly, my voice gentle but firm. "Well, why don't you start by telling me what you've written so far? Maybe we can figure out where it's not clicking." As he began to share, his words stumbling out in a rush, I could see the layers of doubt and frustration slowly unraveling, like peeling away the skin of an onion to reveal the tender core beneath. It wasn't just about the essay anymore, it was about him. His journey, his story, and the struggle to make sense of it all. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just helping him with an assignment. I was helping him with something much larger. The act of learning how to express himself, to find his voice in the quiet chaos of his own mind. The afternoon stretched on, and the words flowed between us, each one a step forward in the dance of guidance and discovery. In the quiet of that moment, I realized how much I had missed this feeling of being needed, of making a difference, even if it was just in a small way. As we worked through his ideas, I couldn't help but feel that I was being given something precious in return. The reminder that even in the quietest of moments, we can still find purpose, and sometimes that purpose comes in the form of an unexpected visit on a lazy Sunday afternoon. Ethan flipped open his notebook, the faint creak of the spine breaking the silence between us. His hand hovered over the pages for a moment, fingers tracing the faded lines of ink. Then, he gently placed the notebook down in front of him, the pages revealing a maze of scattered thoughts, broken lines, and crossed-out words. It was a map of a mind struggling to find its way. Bits and pieces of his life strewn across the paper like the shards of a puzzle waiting to be pieced together. As I leaned in to get a better look, my eyes skimmed over the barely formed sentences that had once been part of a more complete thought. There were moments captured in the ink of a snapshot of his life. The day his parents had divorced, the bitter sting of his father walking out without so much as a goodbye, the unspoken loneliness that had followed him like a shadow. I could sense the weight of his words, the struggle, the yearning for something he couldn't quite name. There was a rawness to it, an honesty that tugged at something deep inside me, gnawing fear of never quite measuring up. I stayed quiet as he spoke, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. I could feel the hesitation in his voice, the way he faltered when he tried to explain how disconnected he felt from the world around him, how he never felt like he truly belonged anywhere, not even with his friends. It was as though he was searching for a place to fit, for a place to call his own, but every attempt left him feeling more isolated. The more he spoke, the more I understood. This wasn't just about a teenage boy grappling with the turbulence of adolescence. This was about a young man who had never been shown the kind of understanding he so desperately needed. And then it hit me, this wasn't just about his past or his struggles with the people around him. This was about him, about the way he saw himself. He wasn't just lost in the world. He was lost within himself. I had always known Ethan as the quiet boy who waved from the driveway, who kept his head down when passing by, who preferred to blend into the background rather than be noticed. But now, as he opened up, I saw a different side of him, One that was vulnerable, yes, but also filled with the kind of courage it takes to admit that you're not okay. And that realization, that shift in perception, made me want to do something more for him. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently over his. His fingers trembled ever so slightly under my touch, but he didn't pull away. Instead, there was a brief flicker of something in his eyes, a look that seemed to say he wasn't sure how to react to this kindness, but he wasn't about to let it slip away either. His gaze met mine for a long moment, and I could see a mixture of gratitude and confusion, of hope and hesitation. It was at that moment that I realized how long it had been since anyone had truly looked at me and seen me as if I had something of value to give. In some ways, I felt I was giving him something as much as he was giving me. A piece of myself. A promise. "You're not as lost as you think you are," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the soft hum of the room. The words came out almost instinctively, a quiet affirmation that felt more like a lifeline than a statement. "You just haven't told your story yet." His eyes softened at the sound of those words. He nodded slowly, like something inside him had unlocked, like the words had given him permission to breathe again. For a brief second, I could see the hesitation in his shoulders begin to ease, the tightness in his chest start to loosen. His lips parted, and he hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to speak, unsure whether he was ready to hear the next part. "But how do I even begin?" he asked quietly, his voice still trembling with doubt. I smiled gently, feeling the warmth of the moment settle between us. Leaning forward, I spoke again, my voice calm but firm, as if I knew the truth that he couldn't quite grasp yet. "You begin right here, with honesty." He looked at me, his eyes searching for something in my expression. There was a flicker of uncertainty, but there was something else too sparkly. A recognition that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry this weight alone anymore. And so we began. For the next hour, we sat together. The silence broken only by the sound of pens scratching against paper. I shared stories from my past, some of them painful, others filled with joy, but all of them true. And with each word I spoke, I saw Ethan's walls slowly begin to crumble. His hand that had once held the pen so shakily now moved with more purpose. It wasn't just an assignment anymore. It wasn't just about getting the words down on paper to finish something. It had become something deeper, something more meaningful. As the hours passed, I watched him open up in ways I hadn't expected. With every sentence he wrote, his voice grew more confident, more sure of itself. He was finding the strength to tell his story, not just the story of his parents, his father's departure, or his loneliness, but the story of who he was becoming. And I could see it in the way his eyes lit up with every word, in the way his shoulders slowly lifted from the weight of the past. He wasn't just telling a story anymore. He was starting to find himself. When we finally finished, the notebook lay in front of him, a small but powerful testament to the journey he had just begun. I saw him sit back for a moment, taking in the words on the pages before him, as if seeing them for the first time. He smiled, a hesitant but genuine smile, and for the first time in the entire conversation, he looked me in the eye. There was something new there, something I hadn't seen before. It was hope. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know it could feel like this." And in that moment, I realized that the act of listening, of truly hearing someone's story, could be the most powerful form of encouragement. It wasn't just about fixing something broken. It was about giving someone the space to rebuild themselves. And in that shared silence, I felt a bond form between us, a bond that went beyond words, beyond the pages of a notebook. It was the bond of understanding, of knowing that even in our darkest moments, we could find the strength to write our own stories, to become something more than the sum of our pasts. And that, I realized, was the most beautiful part of it all. The late afternoon light was slowly fading as the clock ticked, marking the end of another quiet day that felt like it had somehow lingered longer than most. As the sun began to set, casting its golden hue across the room, Ethan stood up to leave. The door creaked slightly as he moved toward it, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. I watched him, noticing the weight in his gaze, something deeper than just a casual goodbye. The silence between us felt thick, yet not uncomfortable, as if there were unspoken words hanging in the air, waiting to be said. "Thank you, Karen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. His words hanging in the air longer than usual. "You don't know how much this meant to me." His eyes met mine, and I could see the sincerity in them, a raw vulnerability that he hadn't shown before. I smiled softly. The words I had wanted to say caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, feeling something shift within me, something undeniable. It was in that quiet moment that I realized Ethan wasn't just coming over for homework help anymore. Something had started to grow between us, something neither of us could name, but both of us could feel, growing in the spaces between the conversations, the silences, and the glances. It was something subtle, yet profound, and I knew it would only deepen with time. The next time Ethan came by, the rain had begun to fall. It wasn't a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that made the world outside feel distant and dreamlike. The air was cooler, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and freshly fallen leaves. Inside, the warm glow of a cinnamon-scented candle flickered, mingling with the fresh, damp fragrance of the world outside. I was folding laundry, the rhythmic motion grounding me, when I heard the familiar knock at the door, a quiet, almost hesitant tap that seemed to echo through the stillness of the house. Opening the door, I saw Ethan standing there, his damp hair sticking to his forehead, his eyes crinkling in a smile that was both shy and hopeful. It was the kind of smile that spoke volumes, a silent invitation to something more. "I brought something," he said, his voice soft, almost unsure. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a printed copy of his essay, handing it to me with the same gentleness that he had shown before. For a brief moment, our fingers brushed, and I felt the warmth of his touch, as if the simple contact between us held the weight of everything unsaid. I took the paper from him and sat down at the kitchen table, unfolding the creases in the paper. My eyes skimmed over the words, and as I read, I felt something stir deep within me. His words were so real, so raw, and in them, I could feel the quiet ache he carried within him, the ache of never truly being seen. But there, in the pages of his essay, he had poured himself out for the first time, letting the words flow freely. He had written about the afternoon we shared, about the iced tea we had sipped, the way I had listened intently, and how the sunlight had streamed through the kitchen window, bathing everything in a warm, golden glow. But it wasn't just the imagery that struck me. It was the vulnerability he had shown in his words, the honesty that poured through the sentences. "You have a voice," I said, my hand resting gently on the paper, feeling the weight of his words settle into my chest. "A real one, and it matters." Ethan sat across from me, his hands clenched tightly in his lap, as if waiting for my judgment. I could see the tension in his body, the way he was bracing himself for something, perhaps rejection, perhaps just the fear of not being understood. But in that moment, I could only see him as he truly was, a young man carrying the weight of his own insecurities, trying to navigate a world that hadn't always been kind to him. His eyes softened, the tightness in his posture easing, as he let out a long breath. I was scared to turn it in. I didn't know if it was too personal. I smiled gently, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper. "Personal is good," I said softly. "It's what makes people care. It's what makes them feel." His eyes met mine, and in that quiet exchange, something unspoken passed between us. It was the recognition of a shared experience, of both of us quietly understanding what it meant to be seen not just as a teacher and student, but as two human beings connecting in a way that transcended the boundaries of roles and labels. The evening stretched on, the rain continuing to fall softly outside, but inside, there was a calmness, a peace that settled over us. We didn't need to say much more. The space between us felt full, not of words, but of understanding. There were no expectations, no pressure to define what was happening between us, just the quiet comfort of knowing that we had crossed into something new, something real. And in that moment, I knew that this connection we were forming, This quiet understanding was something that would last far longer than any of the lessons or essays we might share in the future. It was something that was being written in the spaces between our words, a story unfolding quietly, like the rain falling outside. "I feel like I can talk to you about anything." Ethan's voice broke through the quiet, the words soft and unsure as if testing the air between us. There was a certain tremor in his tone, a rawness that echoed in the spaces of my own heart. It was the kind of vulnerability that, if left unnoticed, could slip away, but if acknowledged, could become something more profound. I felt the weight of his words, the subtle plea for understanding wrapped in them. And as he spoke, something stirred deep inside me, a quiet recognition of a time in my own life when I had felt lost, uncertain of who I was or where I belonged. I had searched for someone to listen to, for someone who might just get it. I met his eyes, and the unspoken connection between us grew stronger, its silent threads weaving a tapestry of trust. Slowly, I reached out and placed my hand gently over his wrist, the touch light, but laden with an honesty that words couldn't express. "I'm glad you do," I whispered, my voice carrying the weight of everything unsaid, a quiet promise. "You're safe here." There was a softness in the air, something that seemed to settle over both of us, like the calm after a storm. As I looked at him, I realized that in this quiet moment, something profound had shifted. It wasn't just about offering comfort, it was about being seen, really seen, without the need for masks or pretenses. His vulnerability invited my own, and in that invitation, we shared something far more powerful than any grand gesture could ever convey. We didn't need fireworks or sweeping confessions to make this connection real. It was the simplicity of our presence together that mattered. The stillness of the evening felt full, pregnant with meaning, as though every breath we took was part of something larger, something unspoken but deeply understood. It was in the way the room felt warmer with him there, even though no words were exchanged for a long while. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, as though we both knew this space was sacred, a moment to just be. In that brief moment of peace, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Life wasn't always about the moments that demanded attention or the loud declarations of emotion. No, it was the moments in between, the quiet, subtle exchanges where two people simply exist in the same space. It was the way he looked at me without needing to say a word, the way I could hear the unspoken comfort in his silence. It was in the way our hands brushed lightly, as if we didn't need to say anything at all to make each other feel understood. I felt my heart swell a little, more than it had at the start of the day. It was a feeling I hadn't expected, an unexpected joy, rooted not in noise or chaos, but in quiet connection. This was it, wasn't it? This was the essence of what it meant to truly understand someone. Not just in the loud moments, but in the stillness. In the times when no one was looking, when the world around us continued its relentless pace. And yet we had carved out a space where time slowed down just for us. And as we sat there, the evening stretching out like a soft blanket, I knew this wasn't just an isolated instance. It wasn't the last time we would sit in silence, our presence alone speaking louder than words. It wasn't the last time I would find myself in that sacred, quiet space where two souls simply understood each other without needing to explain. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was almost too comforting to describe. Ethan would stop by, sometimes with a notebook in hand, scribbling his thoughts, his ideas, but sometimes he would just come by to sit. He didn't need to say much, and I didn't either. It became enough just to be in the same room, sharing the space, sharing a moment. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet company that spoke volumes. We didn't need to fill the silence with words. We didn't need to fill the time with anything at all. And that, I realized, was a rare gift. In a world that always felt like it demanded something more, something louder, this gentle, unassuming connection between us was enough. In those small moments, those fleeting, quiet exchanges, I found something deep, something unexpected, a kind of peace, a kind of belonging. Ethan brought something with him that I hadn't anticipated, and understood that, sometimes, the most profound moments aren't the ones that make the loudest noise. It wasn't the grand plans or the flashy gestures, but the softness, the quiet ease of sharing space, of sharing time, of sharing our own stories in the most subtle, meaningful way. It was as if, in each of those moments, we were allowing ourselves to exist not in a world of expectations or demands, but in a place of understanding, where the simplest things could make everything feel complete. In this, I found something precious, a connection that didn't need to be loud to be real. And somehow, I knew that this was just the beginning.